everyone, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing a fun, mildly controversial, but mostly just reflective video on some of the books I've read in 2020, and that is the worst and most surprising books I read this year. That's right, I'm doing a bit of a combo video today, and that is honestly because the year 2020 was truly one of my best reading years of my life, both in the quantity of books and the quality of books, and I simply just do not have enough worst books to make an entire video chatting about them. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely books to talk about, but it just wasn't like the full length of a video, so I decided to combine it with also my most surprising books of the year, which are novels that did just that, surprised me. It could have been because they've taken a larger part in my life than I was expecting, the genre surprised me, or perhaps the story itself just delivered more than I was anticipating. But yeah, that's the topic of today's video, so without further ado, let's dive right into the worst books I read in 2020, because let's be real, the tea is the most fun. Starting off this list is Jonathan Strange of Mr. Norrell. This I think I can also file under surprised me as well, because I picked this book up anticipating loving it. This is a long, dry story following two wizards in the 19th century in England. It kind of has like Jane Austen social vibes of people kind of being in sitting rooms and tea rooms, like discussing philosophy and kind of shooting barbs at one another, as well as having sort of some adventure as it relates to magic and kind of uncovering the mythology behind magic as well. Particularly, this is a story that follows two men and two rivals as they both try to uncover and understand the most magic possible to become the best magician in the UK. To say it's disappointing that I didn't love this book is an understatement. I went into this wanting to love it so much. Honestly, I go into every book wanting to love it personally, but this one especially. I read it between December and January of this year, and most of it, at least 50% of it, I actually listened to it via audio because it was just so slow. Obviously, the pacing and the dryness quality of like the narrative style is a choice and one that I can respect objectively, but as a reader consuming this story, it just took me forever. Every time I picked this book up, it felt like I was pushing myself to read it, pushing myself to finish it, which in and itself might be like the point of this book because it was like mildly painful to read. But ultimately I just found it to be too slow. I wasn't entertained enough. I appreciated the story. I ended up giving it like 3 stars, but would I say this is a book for everyone? No. Would I say this is even a book for me? Maybe not. Like, I'm happy I read it, but it was a journey to get to the end of this book, let's just put it that way. Next 3 books I'm gonna talk about, I would say are also a surprise because I wanted to love them so bad as well, and that would be the first 3 books in the Dresden Files series by Jim Butcher. The first one being Stormfront, then Full Moon, and then Grave Peril. I gave this series another chance this year and I ended up reading 3 of the books. They're definitely fast-paced. It's an urban fantasy story following a wizard detective, Harry Dresden. And throughout the story, he's essentially trying to solve paranormal-based crimes, usually resulting in some sort of supernatural creature that has entered the city of Chicago and he must save it. At a base level, I find them entertaining. I think Jim Butcher did a great job explaining the magic as well as providing a great background on the supernatural creatures. Where my issue with the series is, and something I just personally couldn't get past, especially after reading it for 3 books, was just being in Harry's head. The male gaze was like off the charts in this book. And obviously everyone has different tolerances here and you're free to enjoy the Dresden Files, but for me personally, it just got taxing. I just didn't enjoy reading from Harry's POV anymore. In general, I just found all the female characters to be pretty flimsy, which is disappointing because I felt like there was such an opportunity within this series to really make it expansive. That being said, everyone says starting in book 5 it gets amazing, but it's just like hard to convince yourself to read 5 books to maybe like a series, and I've already read 3, so I might check out books 4 and 5 in 2021, but for the most part, I would say I was very disappointed by books 1 through 3 of the Dresden Files. Yeah, I wanted to love it, but Harry, just not my man. He's just not my man. Next up, I have The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is a thriller novel set on a remote island during a wedding of 2 very rich and famous people, and essentially a dead body is found in the middle of the reception and sort of the drama starts from there. This to me was generally a pretty entertaining thriller. It definitely delivered the anticipation and the pacing that you would want from a thriller story. That being said, it is not the best thriller I read, and it's not one I feel like I would outwardly recommend over other thrillers, if that makes sense. It was strongly middle of the road. So it's not a bad book, but again, this was a year where I've read so many incredible books where a middle of the road kind of warrants a mention within this video, if that makes sense. I'll say too, the pacing was one I wasn't anticipating. I wanted it to be more of a whodunit style story versus this was kind of a multi-POV tale of really messed up people doing really messed up things to each other, and it wasn't so much about the murder but the journey to the death itself, which was definitely intriguing, but in terms of like what I wanted and what I was expecting, it didn't quite deliver in that way, which might be more of a marketing problem than a book problem. Yeah, that is why this book made the list. And then the last book from my worst books of 2020 I'm gonna mention is From Unseen Fire. This book was, man, it was honestly just boring. This is a Roman-inspired historical fantasy novel with elemental magic kind of at its heart. And I would still say, if you love Roman history and that is just your favorite era, your favorite time period, and you will read anything and everything set during that time period, I would still definitely check this out. But for me, and I actually buddy read this with Starla, we just found it to be very dry. It had a lot of potential because it was set on sort of a power change from one dictator and now the Republic is trying to rise. You follow a lot of different characters. A lot of them have different types of magic that are sourced to different gods. It was really cool, but the main issue I had with this book was definitely the writing style. It was written almost like a textbook, I would kind of describe it. It was very meticulously detailed. I just could never really fall into the characters' heads. I felt like I was just kind of like watching from afar and not really invested in the story. I ultimately actually DNF'd this book at about 60% of the way through. So yeah, this was probably the most disappointing book of 2020 in terms of quality. Emotionally, I think Harry Dresden is the most disappointing because of how badly I wanted to love that. Those are the 4 books I would say are the worst books of 2020. Moving on to the most surprising books of 2020, which will definitely be overall a different vibe as I loved all of these books. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The first book is not so much a book, but more an author, and that is Robin Hobb. In general, 2020 was a year I wanted to read Robin Hobb. It was on my list. I was excited to check out her books, but little did I know that Robin Hobb would quickly become one of my favorite fantasy authors of all time. I flew through the Farseer trilogy this year, the Live Ship Trader trilogy I'm currently reading and almost completed as well. I'm on the 3rd book, and just her stories live in my heart forever. I just was not anticipating how much I was going to love her books. I should have maybe, because she's very popular and very lauded within the community, but man, I just love her writing, and I think it's because of how character focused she is. And I'm kind of a sucker for character-led fantasy, especially how dynamic her characters can be. She'll just destroy you, and it hurts so bad, but it also hurts so good, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I would say Robin Hobb is definitely one of my biggest surprises of 2020, and I will definitely be continuing to read her books throughout 2021. I'm thrilled I picked up her books this year because it's just been a joy and a journey. From there, I would also say Tessa Dare, particularly the Duchess deal, was another surprise for me in 2020. Agency romance or historical romance was a new to me genre this year. I have read romances in the past, but for the most part, it was never really a big priority in terms of what I chose to pick up. But from the months March to April, I think I read like 8 Regency romance books. I could not put them down. And I would say my favorite of them all would definitely be Tessa Dare's Girl Meets Duke series. They were just so much fun, fluffy, with great relatable characters, brooding heroes, and romances. They just swept me away and entertained me in a way that I just cannot describe. I read them all in like one day. They really brought a smile to my face and entirely entertained me. And in general, it's made me realize that Regency romance is definitely a genre I want to read more of and will probably continue to read throughout the rest of my life. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised given how much I love Regency-based films and television shows, but now that I've added books to the mix, it's even more fun. But yeah, Tessa Dare, if you haven't read Regency romance, even if you don't think you like it, I would still recommend the Girl Meets Duke series. Such a good time. Steamy, funny, it's everything you could want. The next book I would say was a surprise for me this year was A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This to me was a surprise because when I picked it up, I was expecting kind of a low stakes, very angsty, mostly ridiculous romance tale. And while it definitely delivered in the angsty romance paranormal category, as it follows a witch and a vampire falling in love and all the fallout of that, what I wasn't anticipating and what I loved so much about this story was the atmospheric academic setting most of this is taken place in. as well as our main character Diana is actually an archivist and a really lauded historian, and our author is actually a historian herself, and you could just see the infusion of history as well as just the technical aspects of being in a library and an archive as a scholar, which just seeped into the story, and I loved it so much. Just the vibe of this tale, which is what I wasn't anticipating. There's so much interesting conversation and analysis of historical events, scientific events, and not to mention the rest of the series is going to be even more historical based, which I'm just so excited about. So this really delivered in the romance category, in the angsty vampire romance category, but it also provided a really intellectual setting that I honestly just enjoyed so much, and it was just like 10 out of 10 for enjoyment. It just really swept me away. And the last book I'm going to talk about is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This was a book before I picked it up that I knew I was going to like. It had such strong reviews, everyone was really enjoying it, but ultimately this was a book that I didn't just enjoy, I loved. This book blew my mind. One of the best YA fantasy novels I have read in years, and just the setup to what this series will likely continue to be in terms of all the books that I hope will come out, I'm just so excited for. I just wasn't expecting a YA urban fantasy novel to live in my heart as it has, because that's generally not my favorite genre. I much prefer a high fantasy, but this was it. But this is the first novel in a new YA urban fantasy series. We follow our main character Bree, who is recently enrolled in a prestigious high school program on the UNC campus. She decides to enroll to kind of flee the memories of her mother who recently passed. Her first night on campus though, she witnesses a magical attack and also learns about a secret society of magic wielders who are supposed to kill these monsters. She then begins to grow suspicious and draws a connection between her mother's death and this secret society. So she decides to infiltrate it by joining a competition to become a member. This is just wild. There's so many characters, there's magic, there's secrets, but also at the heart of it, it has a main character, Bree, who you love. It was artfully crafted, so well written. It has like an Arthurian legend at its heart, but the author constantly subverts that as well as other fantasy tropes. It was just so good. I feel like I'm just gonna be shouting about Legendborns from the rooftops forever because it was just top tier. So yeah, this was definitely a big surprise for me this year. Alrighty guys, those are my worst and most surprising books of 2020. Let me know down below some books that you did not like or that surprised you, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon.